All right, Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening, good evening, good evening. It's a very impromptu, random episode of the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Ordinarily, we come to you on Wednesdays at 7:30, but given the developments, the breaking news in a South African sense, but for Americans, have been stewing on this for 24 hours plus already. Joe Biden, the US president, the incumbent, and was initially the Democratic Party nominee standing for re-election, has dropped out of the race. That's right. He has said, sayonara, I am out. I'm going to go, as Trump would derisively call him, Sleepy Joe. He's now going to go sleep and enjoy his twilight years. But there are implications politically from this. There is a complete meltdown and a fallout from it. And I wanted to have that conversation with someone who is in the United States who can help us unpack this issue. But hey, where are my manners? Let me begin where I should begin and say, Sanbonani, my name is Sihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. This is the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Whether you're watching this broadcast on Facebook, X, or on YouTube, do me that solid favor. Hit that like button. Yebo, smash that like button. Let's try and get the engagement up. And hey, as you're trickling in, let me know where you're watching from. It's always very good to get a sense of where people are watching this show from. So just in the comment section, just let me know where you're watching from. And it'll be very interesting reading as the show goes along. And if you are watching on YouTube in particular, guys, do me a solid favor. Subscribe, please, to the channel. Help me reach my goal of 45,000 subscribers by the end of the year. I'm pretty close to that already. I think I'm sitting at 44,800 now. So I might have to revise that goal. But nonetheless, please do me that solid favor and subscribe to the channel. And a reminder to you, we are experiencing some gremlins, let's call it that, but we do have a website at bigdaddyliberty.com. Now, with that being said, let me circle back as a former spokesperson to a US president famously used to say all the time, Jen Psaki, lol, she's probably also having a meltdown right now. But to unpack this so much more and everything that is US politics right now and help us decipher and understand the departure of Joe Biden and what that means for Americans. And we'll extrapolate what that also means for us as South Africans, is of course the host of the Chris Wyatt show. Give me a moment here as I now lose him completely from my software. That's how gremlins work, don't they? I can see him, but it's not allowing me to put him up on screen. But the Chris Wyatt Africa podcast is a show which is, again, anybody watching here is no stranger of. There it is. No, I've just completely lost him again. He's hopped out and he will be back in a moment. But as I said, guys, the developments are very interesting for us as South Africans. There it is, back on screen. As of course, the news broke for us yesterday as South Africans that Joe Biden, aka Sleepy Joe, is out. But enough from me and my waffling. Let me get Chris on screen. There he is. Chris, good evening, Baba, or good day to you.
Good afternoon. Yeah, it's good to see you again. Listen, I dropped off because you were having difficulty finding me. It looked like it connected just as I dropped off, so I'm back. Listen, Sila, I was in South Africa, and unfortunately, you've been very busy, as was I. We didn't have a chance to meet in this last visit, so it's regrettable, but perhaps next time. But I got back from South Africa, and of course, I'm 6 hours ahead with the time change. I get here, and that next night when I'm back, or the night I get back, it's Joe Biden and Donald Trump in what's supposed to be a debate. And so I actually fell asleep. It was so, uninformative that I fell asleep while it was on. I woke up at 2:00 in the morning, which of course would be 8 a.m. South Africa time. And it was still on a rerun. So I watched it. So we went from that non-consequential event from a standpoint of telling us anything in policy, but a very consequential event as far as the presidential race, to the assassination attempt of Donald Trump 9 days ago, and now Joe Biden dropping out of the race. This is bat crap crazy. I mean, this is unprecedented. We haven't seen anything like this since 1968. And yes, I was a little tyke. I was alive in 68. That's when Lyndon Baines Johnson, because of the Tet Offensive and America losing confidence in his presidency, withdrew from the presidential race and just walked away as a sitting president. That's the last time something like this has happened. This is bat crap crazy. And that's where we're at right now. But yeah, we could talk about this and what's going to happen now with Kamala Harris, maybe and maybe not. Donald Trump, it's a lot unfolding as we speak.
Absolutely. I mean, again, that expression, there is a lot happening, and seemingly a lot can happen in 48 hours. Let's maybe take a step back and look at and take the conversation from that debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, which really, if anything, was a shocker of a performance for Joe Biden, despite, of course, the sort of Democratic talking heads saying, oh, this is a fantastic showing, some of them said. Others were quite brave and openly admitted that he looked worse for wears from that debate. And there's a reason why we're starting here, because it was, on the one hand, it seemed as though it opened the door of clarity for providing a sense for American viewers that, look, these are the two options you have here. Someone who's barely holding it together and is now, even his ardent supporters are asking the question, how has he been governing for the past 3 and whatever months, years it's been so far? Versus someone who's sharp, who's witty, who's taking little jabs at Biden during that debate. And yeah, fine. If you're not a fan of Trump, you might argue that, look, maybe he's a little loose with the truth from that debate. But nonetheless, those two stark contrasts were there for everybody to see.
Well, unlike South African media and much of the Western media, I'll be honest, and I was honest when I evaluated that debate. I was not impressed by either candidate. I don't think Trump was even on his game that night. I'm not sure why. The only times I actually found Trump interesting weren't even policy. There were when he was taking digs at Biden. When when they asked Trump to respond, he goes, "I don't know how to respond to that. I don't know what he said. I don't think he knows what he said." But I mean, beyond that, it wasn't a typical Trump performance, and I was actually a little concerned about Trump from that debate. Not major concern, but just what's going on? Why is he off his game? Because normally he'd mop the floor with someone like Biden and with Harris when it's her turn. But Biden was beyond atrocious. I mean, he wasn't even there. He was checked out. He was completely checked out. And the fact that the media lied about it, see, I'm honest. I've told you Trump wasn't good in that debate. And I said it at the time. But the bottom line is that we have been gaslit by the Democratic Party, the media, and corporate elites since 2020 with this guy. This is utterly insane. This man was never capable of being president. His marbles were never there. We knew this. Some of us have pointed it out time and time again. We're called crazy. Just like when Trump said, hey, they're spying and bugging the Trump Towers. Well, they were. They were. Illegally, they were doing it too. They violated the Constitution. And they all dismissed Trump. They all dismissed Biden. Oh, he's fine. And part and parcel of this, the number one liar in all this, aside from Jill Biden, and I don't really care what she has to say, the number one liar complicit in this fraud to defraud the world, not just America, because look how the world has gone on fire since Biden has been president, is Kamala Harris. Every time you turn around, oh, no, the president's sharp. He's sharp. He's great. He's wonderful. We're unburdened by what was. Oh, my gosh. Anyway, so, yeah, it's I see you laughing. I actually used that last night in the video. But the bottom line here is that we have been gaslit all along. And the reason the debate is so important is because, and there's two schools of thought on this, and one which you haven't heard conspiracy theories tell yet, but I bet you're going to hear this. I'm not making the claim, but I'm going to lay it out there. The first one is that all of us knew that he wasn't there. But now it's blatantly obvious for the world to see, and they couldn't cover it up anymore. Now, the flip side of that coin is that it was already blatantly obvious. They knew this guy wouldn't make it to the end because there'd been an incident on Air Force One, which Laura Loomer had reported, and it was dismissed as, oh, nothing happened. Now, she's just a wackadoodle right-wing journalist that's just lying. But in fact, we're getting other reports now that whatever that incident was on Air Force One was a medical thing, and that was, so that was kind of covered up. That was after the debate. So maybe something happened. They realized we got to get rid of this guy and dump him. We're not going to make it to the finish line. And so the debate may have been a setup so that everybody, we got to get rid of this guy. So ultimately, the elites that are really running everything, the Obamas, the Pelosi's, the Schumers, the corporate elites on Wall Street, they probably said, all right, make him do it. Because we never have debates in July. Debates come in September. This has never happened before. We have debates in September, not in July, after the party conventions, after you have nominees. But they held a debate in July, unprecedented, and Biden stumbled, mumbled, and suddenly there was a massive call to get rid of him. Was it intentional to get rid of their nominee? I think it might have been.
Even as you're saying this, there's a part of me that sort of wants to really put on what would be called a conspiratorial hat, but really
a tinfoil hat.
You've laid it out quite bluntly here to say that it did seem as if there's a little bit of a alley-oop being sort of laid up here for Biden to literally miss it, and quite explicitly then have the narrative be controlled by the Democrats themselves to say, look, on the one hand, yeah, it's a disaster in inverted commas to lose your top candidate at this point in the race, with it literally being, on the one hand, a month away from their convention, and we'll speak about that in a second, but also a few months away from the actual election. But it's been coming in for quite a while now, Chris, the sort of the ructions of there being perhaps a plan B or even plan C being put forward. In some cases, overtly in our faces. For example, one Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, suddenly being very prolific in his appearances in Washington, even speaking to foreign leaders. Do you think this is something that they've been cooking, so to speak, as a plan B, something to keep as a plan in the wayside, so to put, for a while now?
Well, at the risk of sounding like I think I know everything, because I don't, I'm not Senior von Rensburg or Nostradamus, but it's been over 18 months since I first predicted that Biden would not be the nominee. Even if he wins the primaries, they would have a brokered convention. That's the phrase I've used. They're talking about open convention now, but brokered, whatever term you want to use. I basically said that what they were going to do is they were going to get rid of this guy at the convention. That's what I've said all along. The way it's unfolded kind of caught me a little bit by surprise, because I thought they'd try to limp along. And the reason they want to get to the convention is that all that money is tied up. You can't give the money to anybody else until the convention. But if Harris becomes a nominee, she was on the ticket with him, so legally she can get the $100+ million that's sitting in the bank. But if they got to the convention and someone else gets a nomination, that money goes. They don't get a penny. They got to start from scratch. And in mid-August, then you've got September, October, you got 2.5 months, and you have no money. It's a disaster. So I've always said they're going to broker this convention. So you mentioned Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom, when DeSantis announced he was running, Gavin Newsom wasn't running for president, but he was going to Florida, and he was talking about Florida and attacking DeSantis, because DeSantis was considered to be the front runner, because the Democrats thought they had destroyed and marginalized Trump with these bogus allegations for criminal cases and all these other things that are going after him. They thought they were going to destroy Trump and he would never survive. But then DeSantis disappears and Newsom backs off of that. But Newsom's been everywhere. But it's not just Newsom. Gretchen Whitmer, or as I prefer to call her, Gretchen Whitless, from Michigan, has been long in this discussion. The FBI actually set up a fake false flag operation, and that's not conspiracy theory. The people involved in the kidnapping plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer didn't start it. The FBI started and recruited these wackadoodles. And so, this was all cooked up to buff her personality up and buff her appearances up. And then in the last 3 months, suddenly we're hearing that the idiot governor that I have in Pennsylvania, the witless clown that failed to uphold the rule of law in 2020, the former Attorney General Josh Shapiro, is suddenly a viable candidate. This has all been in the works for a long time. And so, I'm not the only person that's been saying this. I mean, Ted Cruz said it a year ago after I said it, and plenty of other pundits have been talking about it. But there's no way that Biden was going to be the nominee in my view. I'm just a little surprised it happened now. I thought it would happen at the convention. So that's the only thing that caught me up. But you're right. Newsom's been there all along. But what happens now, what unfolds now is going to be a little bit crazy, Tsile, because it all looks like people are all in for Kamala Harris. But Obama's not in for it. And a few other significant people aren't in for her. So they might come to the standard, but they're going to play it out. I know that they're not dumb enough to think that she's a viable candidate. She's not. The only reason she becomes viable is if stupid people vote for her because of stupid reasons. Oh, she's the first Black president. No, that was Obama. Oh, she's the first Black female president. No, she's Indian. Oh, no, she's whatever. It's that sort of nonsense gets people's votes, but that's not going to get you across the finish line. Her record as a prosecutor is abysmal. Her constant lies and misstatements, her cackling, her nonsense, her word salad. She is a made for destruction candidate, and Trump is just going to whip her like a rag doll.
Yeah, this is what makes the entire thing very interesting. And again, it speaks to the complete breakdown on the one hand to relations within the Democrat Party. And I want us to focus in on this for a moment, because again, you've raised a few nested features here insofar as potentially if there is a move with the party rallying behind Kamala Harris, what does that even look like, firstly? And secondly, who are the prospective running mates for Kamala? And I will get into that in a moment, but I want us to just take a moment here and look at the actual Democrat Party, because first things first, how they gave Joe up was perhaps a very telling, in the sense that they literally dropped him like a hot potato. Like, they just said, we're not playing with this guy anymore. That's it. And these are some of his closest confidants to an extent, and people, ironically, who themselves are in the same position as Joe Biden, so far as them being old, the likes of Nancy Pelosi, etc. It's ironic how they used arguments that could be used against them to an extent. But nonetheless, the decision making around this, considering not more than 48 hours ago, this is the chap who, in the midst of having COVID, that's Joe Biden, was saying, hey, I'm still in this race. I'm not going anywhere. And then literally at the last minute says, actually, let me just get the wording right. Just bear with me, Chris, because ironically, the BBC wrote the story up quite well. And I'm holding no water for
actually, it's not ironic. The British media were the first to break the story. There were Twitter users in the US like Brit Hume, who broke within a couple minutes of it. He had the letter, and Piers Morgan did it too. But then it was the Independent, the Telegraph, and BBC who published the story before any US newspapers published it. I know, because I covered it live.
Absolutely. And that's what really, again, I say this because I really hold no water for British media, but they got this spot on, them and The Guardian, ironically, again, another British publication. But give me a moment. I'm going to put it up on screen. I want to just read this excerpt from it very briefly, and I'll have you chew on it, because it really was instructive. Come on, my software is... In fact, while I'm doing this, while I'm struggling with this, remember, you're watching the Big Daddy Liberty Show. It's an impromptu, random show, something that was prompted by the breaking news. Joe Biden has dropped out. I'm in conversation with, of course, the host of the Chris Wyatt Africa podcast, Chris Wyatt himself. There he is on screen. And of course, on screen now, as you can see, is that particular Guardian article, the 48 hours that consigned Joe Biden's 2024 candidacy to history. And the article is a great one. Please do yourself a favor and read it. But this is the part I wanted to get to. I highlighted it and I clicked on it, and I've lost where I highlighted it. There we go. So as the people around Joe Biden in the Democratic Party began to sort of really turn on him, here's where it got very interesting. California lawmakers close to Nancy Pelosi, the former Democratic Speaker of the House, joined the chorus. That's the chorus, of course, for Joe Biden to actually step down. Adding her name to that of Adam Schiff was Congresswoman Jo Lofgren. If I butchered her surname, I don't care. Told Biden bluntly that his candidacy was, quote, on a trajectory to lose the White House and impact potentially the crucial House and Senate races down ballot. It is for these reasons that I urge you to step aside. While the 40-odd members of Congress who by Saturday, again, the last 48 hours here is what we're talking about, had stuck their necks above the parapet, remained a small minority of the 264 Democrats in Congress. In private, the rot went much deeper. The stamp of Pelosi and other leading Democrats who had been pushing Biden to quit from behind the scenes was beginning to tell. And this is the kicker. As Biden continued to self-isolate, remember he had COVID, or has COVID, the spicy cough, as we call it on the show, continued to self-isolate in his house in Rehoboth Beach in Delaware with his First Lady, Jill Biden, only able to support him from a separate room. The president could sit and stew over the many of his supposed political friends who were abandoning him. According to the New York Times, he was fuming about Pelosi's role as the person he blamed for being the prime instigator of a campaign against him. That's the real story here, Chris. From the perspective of Joe Biden, it's almost like a Caesar moment. Et tu, Pelosi.
Indeed, et tu, Pelosi. That's a good way to look at it. Excuse me. Yeah, it's I have to wonder, does he even have the spicy cough? And here's another thing, that's a very convenient timing of that after the assassination attempt and the incompetence of the Secret Service and the Secret Service director. If I'm not, this is a conspiracy, but I am stating unequivocally the incompetence of the Secret Service is the biggest cock up in the history of the Secret Service. But it's very fertile ground for conspiracy theories that they intentionally wanted Trump to be murdered. Whatever the case is, that was a lot of fuel that was going to come at Biden. And conveniently, he has COVID. When that happens, he goes off the campaign trail. I wonder if he even has a spicy cough. And beyond that, when Lyndon Baines Johnson decided to drop out of the presidential race, he went on television. I think it was from the Oval Office. I was like 4 at the time, but I've seen it later. He went on and he announced it to the country that he was withdrawing, not running for re-election, will not seek his party's nomination. We haven't seen or heard from Joe Biden. We don't even know if he wrote the letter. Where is Joe Biden at? Will we ever see Joe Biden again? Is he in a coma somewhere? Is this Dave, the movie? Is that what's going on here? Are we going to get a body double for Biden? Look, I'm not trying to spread conspiracy theories, but this is beyond bat crap crazy. Where is the president? And if he's unable to run because of his declining health and mental acuity, which is what his brother tweeted, he said it's because of his health and his acuity, that's why he's not going to run, then he's not capable of being the president. Where is the 25th Amendment being invoked? Why isn't Kamala Harris now the 47th president of the United States today? And by the way, then it would be Mike Johnson, the Republican Speaker of the House, who would be the vice president.
Even as you're saying this, and again, I just want to take 2 more steps back here before we get to the meat and potatoes of things as to where things will go going forward, potentially. You have a situation here where a lot of Americans, and I want to give it context because I think us as South Africans often think that America is fine. Nothing's wrong there. It's all hunky-dory. That's just simply not the case. Americans right now are really struggling. They are suffering under a cloud of really policy outcomes that have characterized this Biden administration. The economy right now is not looking as hot as it should be, despite what some of the Democrat politicians say. Oh, this is the best economy we've seen in a while, they'll say. Inflation was first transitory, was that word that sort of pumping around, but now it's abating thanks to Biden policies. But nonetheless, Americans on the ground are very acutely aware of the effects of what has been a 4-year Biden administration on the economy, on immigration, and effectively on issues of the seemingly decaying state of the US that people grew up in. That notion, Chris, of the American dream has seemingly dissipated. It's died under the hopelessness that you're seeing now. Talk to me from the psyche of the average American right now. Are they looking at the departure of Joe Biden and lamenting it as a one Van Jones did, for example, on CNN, even crying on air, saying, oh, this is like a grandfather who we take the keys away of his car. It's very sad, they tell us. Or are Americans saying, actually, finally, it's symbolic, yes, that he's stepping down, but it's meaningful insofar as the other options now are a potential return of 45 of Trump.
Well, obviously, I can't speak for 330 million Americans or the 35 million foreign nationals who are criminal alien invaders in our midst, but I can speak for those who I interact with here in Pennsylvania, and I've been in Maryland and DC since this has all been going on. So here in the Mid-Atlantic, I've talked to a lot of people in person, on the phone, and at different locations. And most people that I've talked to, I'm going back to the debate performance, the assassination attempt, and now not all these people I've talked to because I've only talked to a few people in the past few days, but most people that I engage with are not excited that Biden is withdrawn from the race. They're not like, finally, they're just like, oh, great. Nothing's going to change now. And the option that's being put forward is even worse than Biden. Kamala Harris is even worse than Biden, if you can believe that. That's just shocking. The man who is clearly the worst president in the history of the republic, who has destroyed our economy, who's destroyed social fabric of this country, who's put the world on fire with his proxy war in Ukraine, with ignoring what's happening in the Sahel, with getting the U.S. military kicked out of the Sahel, supporting Niger and Mali and Burkina Faso, and the chaos going on there, Somalia, Mozambique, Myanmar. The list goes on and on and on. The tensions and antagonism with North Korea that's back on the stage. The list goes on and on. This man has dropped the ball. The destruction of the historic Abraham Accords, which brought peace to the Middle East. Now, the accords are still in place, but they're kind of in tatters. Fortunately, the signatories of it are not taking action against Israel. Morocco is not doing it. The UAE is not doing it. Sudan is embroiled in its own conflicts. But the point is that all of the stuff was accomplished in just 4 short years. Well, 3, because the COVID, we really screwed the last year. But in 3 years has all been wiped out. And we've gone back to even worse days when Obama was president. So, but most people aren't excited. They're not like, they're just like, oh, I mean, nothing is going to change. We still are paying 50% more for petrol. We're still seeing interest rates that are 4 times what they were just 3 years ago. We're still seeing the price of everything. My groceries cost me over $800 a month now. They used to cost me $240 a month when Trump left office. I haven't brought in 6 children into my house to feed them. This is just my groceries, and I don't eat caviar. I mean, I buy generic things. It's just insane. We are all, Americans are suffering. The world is suffering, and Biden leaving the campaign doesn't change that. Leaving office doesn't change that, and I think most people recognize that. So most people are kind of like, man.
Even as you're saying this, I want to take us now to the real nub of tonight's conversation. Not that anything we've spoken about now hasn't been, but it's the where to from here. And this requires us to sort of look at the potential candidates that may actually eventually be on the ballot paper. Now, from a Democratic perspective, I suppose there is a fallout here because there is going to be this convention, as I said, in a month. And there is a likelihood that someone else from the Democratic Party might stand up and say, look, hey, actually, screw Kamala Harris. I would like to stand, and I've canvassed enough people to actually become the nominee for the Democratic Party. Well, let me rephrase this question. What is the likelihood of that, number one? And number two, who would be the likeliest candidate who can pull something like that if it were to happen? And the alternative, of course, I want to speak to is candidate Kamala Harris. What does that even look like? Because if you look at her polling at the moment, she's polling just as low as Biden in contrast to Trump. So she's not even a sure bet for Democrats.
No, she's not. Okay, so who would step forward? Well, first off, we've all talked about gruesome Gavin Newsom, which is what I call him. Gruesome Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom, the former spouse of Kimberly Guilfoyle, who's knocking boots with one of the Trump sons and engaged to him. But isn't it ironic? These leftists and rightists, they all sleep together. Anyway. But so Newsom is a coward. He will not challenge Harris unless she's wounded. Right now, she's not wounded. Right now, she's being pumped up. They're filling her up. There's people coming to her standard, $50 million. And that's what this is all about, Sile. That's what this is all about. The reason he had to go, even if it wasn't a medical emergency, it's because the donors turned off the taps. The spigots got shut off, and there was no money coming to the Democratic Party. And winning an election takes a lot of cash. Trust me, I spent a lot of my own money running for office and lost badly recently. I didn't take any donations because I'm not crooked like these people. I used my life savings to do it, and it wasn't a good expenditure. I'll tell you that. But anyway, so the money dried up. We're not talking about 100,000 Rand. We're talking about, billions of Rand are drying up here. Hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, within hours of her being announced, being endorsed by Biden, $50 million flowed into the campaign. $50 million. So, I mean, that's pretty significant. So that's what it's all about. But Newsom is a coward. He won't challenge her unless she's wounded. However, Joe Manchin from West Virginia is a centrist, and he's a lifelong Democrat, former governor of West Virginia, well-regarded. I think he's okay. He's a decent human being, but I don't well-regard him. But he could challenge Trump in a very significant fashion. He is talking about refiling as a Democrat, and he has support in the Democratic Party as a senator. So that could be a serious challenge. And he has nothing to lose because ostensibly he's become an independent. He'll come back kind of AKA Bernie Sanders. Beyond that, Gretchen Whitmer and Josh Shapiro out there, but I think both of them are kind of cowards too. They'll probably be looking at for a vice presidential slot. The problem with picking Shapiro, this is an issue for me because I have no issue with people of faith, but Josh Shapiro is Jewish, and they will lose a lot of places where Muslims and Arabs live in this country. I'm not trying to put Arabs and Muslims in a box, but the reality is,
especially for Democrats, given that Minnesota sort of
Right. Minnesota is going to be an issue. Michigan's going to be a huge issue. And those are states they have to win. They have to win Michigan. So Shapiro is not going to go over well. And frankly, there's some bigots and racists in the country too who won't for him vote just because of that. Witless is another, that might be a pick if Harris gets it, and picking Gretchen Whitmer to be the vice president. And vice president really doesn't matter. And this brouhaha about JD Vance, at the end of the day, nobody cares. It doesn't bring a lot to the ticket. And the same thing with vice president. But they could go the rah, it's the all-girl team, and that will get them some votes. So that's a possibility. That'll be the historic first all-female ticket. I can just see it now. In this corner, it's Kamala Harris and Gretchen Whitmer. No, but Kamala Harris is a terrible candidate. I mean, she ran as a candidate for president in 2020, and I've already seen the Washington Post already try to make excuses for why she didn't do well. But here's the bottom line. Remember this. She got less than 2% of Democrats to poll in support of her when she ran. She withdrew from the Iowa caucus before she even ran because she was so bad a candidate. And when she withdrew from the race, what did the Democrats like Joyless Reed and the twits on the Dystopian Views say? Well, it's because America's racist. Those Republicans. Hey, genius. Republicans don't vote in the Iowa caucus for Democrats or the primaries. Only Democrats vote. So if there are racists because they won't vote for Kamala Harris, then the Democrats are the racist. Anyway.
I mean, the whole thing is actually laughable. And again, this is not to say that there aren't Democratic candidates who are absolutely brilliant. I mean, one lady who I absolutely respected, if they wanted to play the whole lady game, was Tulsi Gabbard. Albeit, I had my
not a fan, but better than any of the people we just mentioned.
I was literally about to say the exact same thing, of picking from the crop, as the expression is. But again, let me bring it back here, because there's the other part of this conversation, which is there is a clear divide here between perhaps the party and the elites within the party, because it did seem that even when Biden did step back, it almost seemed as if he spiked the punch bowl or put a turd in the punch bowl, if that's the expression, by almost fingering immediately Kamala Harris as with the endorsement, basically not even giving the party an opportunity to mull over what they may have wanted from this. Now, again, it stands to reason that Kamala is the natural option, given, as you pointed out, the fundraising imperatives and the like. But it did seem to be a thumb in the eye of the likes of Pelosi et al., Adam Schiff et al., to be like, well, actually, okay, fine. If you want me to step down, Kamala Harris is who I'm endorsing. Deal with that at this upcoming convention. Do you think that'll play out, that tension, if you will play itself out on the floor? Are we about to see something spectacular at the Democratic National Convention here, Chris? What's likely going to play out?
Well, first off, I had no plans of watching Democratic National Convention because they've become so lame since 2004. That was the last good one. I actually watched that one. That's when they introduced Barack Obama, and he seemed like a very confused individual. He was a conservative, talking about faith, family, flag, and against gay marriage. And I was like, wow, this guy's conservative. But no, not at all. That was just bogus. But that was the last one I watched. I've tried to watch a little bit. They just become unwatchable because it's just become attacking Republicans and calling white people racist all the time. And it's the white people doing it. That's the funny part. So, but we are going to see something here. And very astute of you, I have to say, is that you've hit it spot on, whether you came to that conclusion on your own or what. Joe Biden put his finger right in the eye of all the people that ousted him by doing that. And he didn't hesitate. And it probably wasn't Joe. I mean, look, I don't know if Joe knows he's not running for office anymore. Have they woke him up yet? Seriously. But I bet you Jill is the one that did that. She's probably the intern that runs his Twitter account. And Jill probably put that out there and said, I endorse Kamala. That really upset whatever plan the elites in the Democratic Party had, because now, boy, if you back, wow, what are you, racist? I mean, she's the incumbent, but that's never the case. People assume that, but that's a narrative. Their collective memory of American politics is like 5 minutes. First off, Mike Pence is not the heir apparent for Donald Trump, even though he's his vice president. He didn't get the nod. He could have run this time. And then Dan Quayle never ran. He never got it for Bush. And Al Gore tried, but lost famously and never came back from that. So being a vice president is not automatically a springboard to becoming president. That's not how it works. And it shouldn't be for Kamala Harris. In fact, she would have been dumped, in my view, if he hadn't fingered her to be the replacement. So it's going to get very spicy. I'll be watching the Democratic National Convention now.
You and I both in that regard. Chris, as we sort of taper off our conversation, let's move perhaps then and we're going to play in hypotheticals here because obviously we don't know. But Trump, my goodness me, is he not looking? He's been riding a proper wave right now. And again, I say this with all due respect because he's gone through an absolute hell, literally, insofar as the assassination attempt on him. But, I want to phrase this question in the way in which it really captured the moment. It does seem, Chris, like there is an awakening, a quiet one, but a momentous one, to a Trump-esque return to the presidency. There are voices, Chris, who just 4 years ago, you'd have never heard them stick their neck out to even voice, even if it isn't overt support for Trump, but even to voice a friendly voice, a friendly word rather, towards him. Let me be precise and specific. One such character is the owner of Facebook, ironically, Mark Zuckerberg, in an interview this week, or last week, pardon me, getting emotional, as he described it, at those scenes of a Donald Trump who had just been shot in the face, getting up, fist raised in the hand, saying, fight, fight, fight. Holding in the American flag is how he actually phrased it. And he then cited that as being something that made him very emotional insofar as his patriotism towards the country. And that's what he argued is why he can see there is an appeal for someone like Donald Trump. And indeed, that is the appeal of the guy. The one guy who is the billionaire having the most connection, ironically, with the forgotten American, that sort of middle American. Is there a growing appeal now that you're also seeing for Donald Trump, especially as I look at a lot of Black American Twitter? There's a lot of chatter there that's becoming very discernibly pro-Trump also in that direction. Are we going to see something special here, Chris?
Well, I agree 100%. So the movement towards Trump has picked up and reached a crescendo until Biden withdrew. And the events of the past month have really pushed it further. But this dates back 18 months ago. Trump was constantly under assault. I mean, look, now they're going to try to run the narrative, the former prosecutor versus the convicted felon. But fair-minded people know that Donald Trump committed no crime. An expired misdemeanor, which the state has authority over, which you can't prosecute because you didn't prosecute it in 3 years when it was available to you. Taking that along with a federal law, which the state court has zero jurisdiction to prosecute. They have no authority. It's not a state law. It's a federal election law, which the Department of Justice under Biden refused to prosecute because there was nothing to it. So they took the federal statute, an expired misdemeanor, and then they didn't even introduce the crime until after the trial. In closing arguments, that's when they introduced, after defense had no opportunity to defend themselves. The defense could call no witnesses, present no evidence to refute this allegation and charge, which was introduced in closing arguments. And then he was convicted on 34 counts. Fair-minded people know this is BS. And Black folks who go through the criminal justice system, which, look, I don't believe in this nonsense of systemic racism. I've lived in this country. I've been on all sides of this. But being a Black person in America, there's an inherent distrust of the judicial system for most Black folks. And I believe that there's a reason for that. So that's what I'll say on that. So Black folks who feel under assault by the justice system, whether they're criminals or not criminals, look at Trump and go, hey, the brother's just like us, man. What's up with that? You know what I'm saying? So that's part of it. Black men have abandoned Joe Biden in droves. Jews are abandoning the Democratic Party. This is unbelievable. Jewish people have voted against their own interests for decades in the Big Ten of the Democratic Party, even though the Democrats dismissed the Jewish community. But Jews, especially wealthy, connected Jews in places like New York. Now, there's only 9 million Jews in America, but that's a significant voting bloc and an influential one. And so people are moving towards, and Hispanics have been in Trump's corner, and now he has a majority of Hispanics, not 40, he's over 60% now. So a lot of people have been moving there. However, Sile, what I want to say is this. The media are all in with the Democratic Party, and that's what's going on. So now we're already seeing it about the prosecutor, the convicted felon, why she's a great candidate, and I already saw it in the South African media today. Philip van Niekerk ran an article. The guy obviously doesn't like Donald Trump, but he wasn't even remotely fair. He just briefly touches on things about Kamala Harris, but doesn't talk about her unelectability and how she lied about, watching Snoop Dogg smoking weed when she was in college. Snoop Dogg was in diapers. He wasn't smoking weed when you're in college. I mean, she's such a liar. And she's talking about how she's the first, Indian American. Okay, fine. You're a Sikh. But then she's the first African-American. She's not an African-American. Her father's from Bahama. And oh, by the way, she's a descendant of the largest slave owner in the Bahamas. But that all gets, anyway, so the point is that the media is going to spin this. And there will be a little empathy, I think, maybe for Biden. He doesn't deserve it. So now, before the election, when I was in South Africa, people asked me what's going to happen. I said it's electoral landslide. This is before the debate. Before the debate. I said election, I meant debate. Before the debate, I was in South Africa, and everyone I talked to in private said, it's electoral landslide. Trump takes 38 states. After the assassination attempt, I said, it's over. It's 45 states minimum. California, it's 49-49 in the polls, and Trump hasn't even gone there. And California has not gone for Republicans since George Herbert Walker Bush in 1988. Right. Mm-hmm. So I mean, that's huge. New Jersey, Trump is ahead in the polls. That's insane. New York, he's within striking distance. He's not going to take New York. But anyway, my point is that so the problem here is what the media does and social media. And people fall for this. The Harry Sissons and these other clowns out there on social media. People are just so easily distracted. I mean, look at South Africa, how easily people are distracted. I mean, we're still talking about John Steenhuisen being matriculant. Who cares? I don't care if he's a high school graduate or he never went to high school. Is he functional? Is he capable? That's what matters. Oh, but look, these people have doctorates. Yeah, they're not real doctorates. They didn't actually study. They were handed to them. This fascination with so it's already happening, but still I'm predicting a Trump victory and a landslide. I'm going to have to go back and look at the states now as the polls develop and we find out who the opponent is. So I really can't make the prediction now, but at this moment I'm still predicting a Trump landslide regardless who they pick. But depending on who they pick, it could change. So I reserve judgment. I have one thing to add after we get back before we close. It's really important that people need them all over. But go ahead.
Absolutely. I was about to say, maybe just as the penultimate question, for me, this election in the US is one of people. Once you exit people's echo chambers and you start sort of watching, on the one hand, social media, on the other, the man on the street type interviews that I often watch from various, influencers online, you're beginning to see ordinary Americans perhaps having a lot more nuance around who they want to have in that seat of power, perhaps, number one. Number two, there's also a recognition seemingly, and again, you correct me if you think my instincts are wrong here, but there does seem to be a overt realization is what I'm looking for, that there is a massive gulf, an almost alienation, if you will, between the ordinary American and the political elites. Sort of broadly dismissed as the coastal elites, but really it's more than that. It's just a discernible political class in America. And lastly, it does seem as though, for me, and this is the uncomfortable part to say because it's true, but I know it'll anger the Trump supporters on my viewership and the Biden supporters equally, but there does seem to be also at the same time a slight disillusionment with US politics. There is a sense that, do these people actually really stand for what we are as Americans? Do they speak to the identity of me as a Midwesterner, for instance, or even if you're a trendy lefty liberal, a hipster out in, Washington State or California, those individuals who are moving discernibly to the left are also finding themselves not maybe finding, not so much actually, I'm sort of correcting myself as I speak here, but, they might argue that they're not finding that representation, if you will. The question being, Chris, let me get to the question. Are we seeing a divide in America here, which might not be easy or even overtly intractable to heal? Is that going to be a risk for Americans going forward? Does the American political system speak to Americans anymore?
No, I don't think the American political system does speak to Americans. Having just run for office and seeing how crooked even a Republican is in the race, there are 5 of us in the race, and one guy cheated and broke the law and got away with it because Republicans wanted him. And so that's very disheartening. I mean, I walked away from my election going, I'm resigning from the veterans organization. I'm going to resign as judge of elections, and I'm never voting again in American politics. That's how I felt. Now, that's not true. I'm not going to do any of that. But I mean, that's the raw emotion I felt from that because, I'm a person of character and this person is not. It's a scumbag. And that's who they wanted. They didn't want someone with character. Now, I would have been okay with any of the other candidates winning because they all appear to be good people of character. But the fix was in. The Republicans lied. So the parties don't represent the people. But Trump isn't the Republican Party. And see, that's the magic of Trump. And here is a overlooked thing, which I haven't heard any analyst talk about other than me. Maybe I can't watch everything, but no one's talking about how at the Republican National, how great it was at one of convention. Okay, fine, it was, but that's not why it was wonderful. Trump was humanized by everyday Americans every single night. They talked about their interaction with Donald Trump, from the lady who was just working in the kitchen, who became the manager of the Doral Country Club, one of the most famous country clubs in the world, because he saw in her leadership ability and trusted her and gave her the ability. And I thought he was a misogynist. He grabbed women by the, this is nonsense. People see the real Donald Trump, And so, it just went on night. All the Abbey Gate soldiers and Marines and sailors who were killed there because of Joe Biden's incompetence. And Joe Biden, we were reminded of him looking at his wristwatch. Who still wears wristwatches in 2024? We all look at our mobile phones to tell the time, but he's looking at his wristwatch when they're bringing the dignified remains out, like he doesn't want to be there. And he's never even said any of those people's names. Donald Trump wasn't even the president of the United States, and he wasn't even running for office at the time. And he called every one of these families, every one of them. And that's so they humanize Trump, and people see that, those who are paying attention. So I think that makes a big difference. But I lost my point. I was going to go back. Actually, I think that's kind of the point. It kind of ties in all three of your points, is but Americans really don't see the parties as reflecting them. But a lot of people see Donald Trump as reflecting them. And a lot of black men, because of the persecution that Donald Trump has faced, see themselves in Donald Trump. Now, how ironic is that? This bleach blonde, 78-year-old white dude with a German surname is more in tune with black men than Joe Biden and the Democrats. But that's a true statement.
Absolutely. And again, it's going to be very interesting to watch this, because we saw it in the previous election that saw Trump be elected. There is a discernible difference between the MAGA movement and actual traditional Republicanism, if you will. Again, there are similarities, don't get me wrong, it's not completely alien to each other, but there is a more groundedness, if you will, between what MAGA is and versus what, the sort of traditional Republicans can be, hence that expression of rhinos, Republican name only. Again, we don't have time to get into that. Maybe if I can twist your arm to join us on Sunday, we'll have a nice panel discussion on this one and really go into some of these nitty-gritties. But as we taper off, and I'll give you that chance to say what you wanted to say at the end, my final question is really this one. Let's put on the sort of silk robes and the crystal ball in front of us, and let's forecast what that Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump looks like. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen between now and the election. Tons can happen. But as things stand right now, Chris, your take on this: who wins? Who is the 7th now?
47th, unless Joe Biden resigns, and then Kamala becomes the 47th.
There you go. Who wins the U.S. presidential election?
All things being equal, a free and fair election, Donald Trump romps to an overwhelming electoral landslide. Not a popular vote landslide, but an electoral vote landslide. And he may be the first Republican to take California. I think he won't, but there's a possibility the first Republican to take it since 1988. And there's 54 electoral votes in California. That's huge. So, yeah, that's the only reason Democrats are even in the race, because they get 54 from there and they get 24 from New York. And that's why they're in races. So, yeah.
Okay. With that being said, Chris, I'm going to give you that final opportunity, as I always do, generally. Final say, and what do the folks need to know?
All right. So here's something that people need to mull over. So why should South Africans even care about this? All right. For the tinfoil hat folks and those who just hate conservatives, just listen, bear with me. And for those who are all in the tank with Trump and conservatives, you're going to love it. But listen. All right. So why should South Africans care? Well, much of the world, the reality is much of the world looks up to America as the beacon of liberty, the country that's run well. That may not be who we are today, but we're doing better than most people despite all our foibles. But the world looks to America to set an example when it comes to representative democracy. However, the Democratic Party has just set an example for people not to look at. They have just defrauded 14.5 million Democratic voters of their vote. This is the party that claims that there's nothing to see in elections. This is the party that says, that the Republicans are trying to defraud people by having voter ID and securing elections. But the Democrats, just like they did in 2016 when they defrauded Bernie Sanders with the superdelegates and negated his win over Hillary Clinton, they have just negated the votes of 14.5 million Democratic voters in primaries across America and our territories. That's what they've done. They have stolen this from the Democratic voters because they don't get to make the pick. They didn't vote for Biden-Harris. They voted for Biden to be president, not for Harris. And now their vote doesn't count because the elites have decided that they know better than you and me. And this goes specifically to the point that Big Daddy Liberty was making about how average Americans don't see themselves in politics. How do you think the 14.5 million Democrats, some of whom were very enthusiastic for Joe Biden, I think they're delusional for being enthusiastic, how do you think they feel now that they have been defrauded of their vote by elites who will decide at a convention who gets it? Now, in the interest of full disclosure, until 1972, this is the way conventions were done. The voters didn't get to decide. There were no primaries. It was a convention. That's where the candidates were picked. But because Johnson pulled out, they had a broken convention then, they changed things right after that, and then the Republicans followed suit, and it became a primary caucus system, and that's been the process where the voters decide who the party candidate is. But this is the first time since 1972 that this hasn't happened. Although technically we can make the argument 2016, the same thing happened when Bernie Sanders was cheated. But this for sure is the case. 14.5 million people. Now, in a parliamentary system like the UK, Germany, South Africa, where voters don't select the president or the prime minister, it's selected by members of parliament. Okay, vote of no confidence, you overturn the government, you get a new one. Makes sense. In a totalitarian fascist state like Chinese communists, where Hu Jintao is removed from the 20th Congress Party and disappears and never seen again, well, we expect that in totalitarian fascist states. We expect it in parliamentary systems where it's legit. But this isn't a parliamentary system. This is supposed to be the will of people. The very party that has spent the last 18 months saying, Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. He's a fascist. Donald Trump will undermine our democracy. Guess who just stole our democracy? The Democratic Party just stole our democracy from 14.5 million people who foolishly voted for Joe Biden, but they did that, and their votes don't mean jack squat. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, folks. Think about that one. The Democrats are the ones who've undermined the rule of law and democracy. And prove me wrong, because you can't. There you go.
Absolutely. And of course is Chris Wyatt from the Chris Wyatt Africa show or podcast. Please make sure you find him on all your social media, especially on YouTube. Guys, subscribe to our channels. Let's get our viewership up and let's get our numbers up. Again, great insights from Chris. Hopefully we'll have him on this Sunday because I think there is a lot to chat about here insofar as also unpacking further, Chris, potentially what this will mean for us as South Africans. There are various trade deals that we have as South Africans with the US, and there will be implications from either direction. If there is a President Trump or a President Harris in office, we'll pick at that hopefully this Sunday. But Chris, before I let you go, maybe let the people know how they can actually find you on your social media sites and the like. How do the folks find you?
Well, I'm all over the place. I'm pretty much every social media site, but the biggest presence where I put the most focus is on YouTube and my daily news program, which today I didn't do the news because we had Kim Cheadle, the director of the Secret Service, who was testifying. So I went to that. We covered that instead. I'll do the news tonight after I get back from my errands. But that's at Colonel Chris Wyatt on YouTube. Also have my original channel, which was censored by YouTube and removed for 2 years, despite the fact I didn't violate their community standards. That's at Real Chris Wyatt. And on Twitter, you can find me at WMW Chris, Whiskey Mike Whiskey Chris on Twitter. And that's my main. I've got several Twitter accounts, but that's the main one. So thanks a lot, Sile. It's always a pleasure. I'll see if I can join you on Sunday. I have to check my schedule, but I would love to join you.
Absolutely. Thank you, my brother. Super appreciate that. And of course, thank you, dear viewer, for watching this show. Let me know what you think, guys. Again, there will be implications for us as South Africans. So get the conversation going. Leave a comment whether you're watching this broadcast on Facebook, X, or on YouTube. And remember, guys, hit that like button, smash that like button, especially if you did like this content. Excuse me. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you are watching on YouTube. We also have a website, a reminder to you that you can find us at BigDaddyLiberty.com. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you Friday morning for another episode of the Vuga Nazo Show, where we'll find out if this week we have a Moomish or a champ of the week. And of course, on Sunday evening at 8 p.m. for Liberty and Friends. With that being said, as I like to say at the end of every broadcast, a reminder for you to never trust a commie.